The parking garage was nearly empty at 6:40 in the morning, just a scattering of early cars and the low hum of fluorescent lights that never fully turned off. Officer Wade Thornton crossed the concrete floor with his hand already extended, reaching for the badge clipped to the woman's blazer before she'd even finished locking her car door. "You're done playing cop," he said, and in one motion he tore the badge from her lapel, the metal clip snapping as it came away. She didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She simply looked at him and said 4 words that would end his career before his shift was even over. "I'm not a cop." 22 minutes later, her office phone would ring, and the voice on the other end would introduce itself as calling from the chambers of the Supreme Court of the United States. Dr. Elena Marsh, though almost no one in the courthouse called her doctor, and fewer still knew why they should, was 51 years old. She stood 5'6", wore her graying hair pulled back in the same low bun she'd worn for the last 15 years, and drove a modest silver sedan that had seen better decades. She arrived at the county courthouse annex every weekday morning at exactly 6:45, parked in the same corner of level 2 she'd used since she started, and walked the same route past the vending machines to the service elevator that took her up to the 4th floor. To the dozen or so people who saw her regularly, the parking attendant, the woman who ran the coffee cart, a few clerks who nodded good morning without knowing her name, she was simply the woman from the 4th floor. Quiet, punctual, unremarkable in exactly the way she preferred. What none of them knew was that Elena Marsh held a doctorate in constitutional law from Yale, had clerked for 2 circuit court judges before she turned 30, and now served as a special master appointed directly by the Supreme Court to oversee a sensitive, multi-state civil rights consent decree, the kind of federal oversight role that exists specifically because a court somewhere decided the situation was serious enough to need someone answerable only to the nation's highest bench. Her badge, the one Thornton had just ripped off her blazer, was not a police badge. It was a federal judicial credential, laminated and unglamorous, the kind that opened doors most people never knew existed. She had chosen this life deliberately. After the clerkships, after a brief and exhausting stint at a prestigious firm that billed clients more in a week than her mother had earned in a year, Elena had gone looking for quiet. She found it in oversight work, reviewing consent decrees, auditing compliance reports, sitting in rooms where the stakes were enormous, but the public attention was almost non-existent. She liked it that way. She had spent enough of her 20s being the only black woman in rooms full of people who wanted to look at her, and she had decided her 30s and 40s would be spent in rooms where nobody looked at her at all, and the work simply got done. The county courthouse annex, where she had an unmarked 4th floor office, was the current site of exactly that kind of quiet, unglamorous, high-stakes oversight. 6 months earlier, the Supreme Court had appointed her special master over a consent decree monitoring a pattern of civil rights violations inside 3 neighboring police departments, violations that included, among other things, officers falsifying reports, conducting unlawful searches, and specifically, disturbingly, singling out black residents for treatment that never made it into any official record. Her job was to review body camera footage, audit incident reports, interview witnesses, and file confidential findings directly with the federal court. She answered to no local chief, no local prosecutor, no local politician. She answered only to the justices who had appointed her. Officer Wade Thornton did not know any of this. What he knew was that a quiet woman in a gray blazer had been showing up at his precinct for the last several weeks, asking to review case files, sitting in on interviews, and, worse, from his perspective, asking specific, pointed questions about 3 incident reports he had personally filed. Thornton was 46 years old, had been on the force for 19 years, and had built a reputation among certain colleagues as a man who got results, a phrase that, in his case, had come to mean a long pattern of aggressive stops, questionable searches, and reports that were, to put it gently, creatively worded. He had been investigated twice before, both times cleared by an internal review board that seemed remarkably eager to give him the benefit of the doubt. He had come to believe, not without evidence, that consequences simply did not apply to him. For 6 weeks, Elena Marsh had been quietly building the case that would prove him wrong. It started, as these things often do, with a pattern that seemed too consistent to be coincidence. 3 separate incident reports, filed by Thornton over an 8-month period, described young black men matching almost identical descriptions, stopped for almost identical reasons: a tail light, a suspicious movement, a furtive gesture, and searched without documented probable cause. In each case, the initial stop had escalated into a search, and in each case, nothing illegal had been found, and in each case, the report contained almost identical boilerplate language explaining why the search had been justified anyway. Elena had seen this pattern before, in other cities, in other consent decrees. She knew what it meant when the same officer's reports read like they'd been written from a template. She requested the body camera footage for all 3 stops. It took the department 11 days to produce it, which was itself notable. Most requests were fulfilled within 72 hours. When the footage finally arrived, it told a story considerably different from the one in Thornton's reports. In one stop, the footage showed a 17-year-old boy standing perfectly still, hands visible, answering every question calmly, while Thornton's report described him as uncooperative and evasive. In another, the footage showed Thornton searching a car's trunk without asking for consent, despite his report stating the driver had voluntarily agreed to a search. In the third, the one Elena found most disturbing, the footage showed Thornton using language during the stop that never appeared in his sanitized written account, language that made his motivations for the stop considerably clearer than his paperwork suggested. Elena documented all of it, methodically, the way she documented everything: timestamps, direct quotes, side-by-side comparisons between the footage and the written reports. She had learned long ago that outrage was not evidence, but a meticulous record was, and meticulous records were what actually changed outcomes in rooms where the stakes were real. She had scheduled a formal interview with Thornton for that Thursday morning, the kind of interview where she would ask him, on the record, to explain the discrepancies between his reports and the footage. She had not told him what she'd found. She had simply requested his availability through the department's normal scheduling channels, the way she requested every interview. No fanfare, no accusation, just a quiet woman with a clipboard asking to talk. Thornton, it turned out, did not intend to sit for that interview quietly. He had spent the previous evening in the precinct break room with 2 colleagues, nursing a mounting sense of grievance about that woman from the courthouse who kept showing up asking questions nobody had asked her to ask. He didn't know her title. He didn't know her authority. He knew only that she made him uneasy, that she had access to files he thought were settled, and that she was scheduled to interview him in less than 12 hours. By the time he left the break room, he had convinced himself, the way men like Thornton often convince themselves, that the problem wasn't his own conduct, but her presence. He arrived at the courthouse annex parking garage at 6:35 the next morning, 10 minutes before Elena's usual arrival time, and waited. When her silver sedan pulled into its usual corner spot on level 2, Thornton was already standing near the elevator, arms crossed, watching. Elena stepped out of her car, locked it with the small chirp of her key fob, and began walking her usual route toward the elevator, a folder of case documents tucked under one arm. "You're the one who's been going through my files," Thornton said, stepping into her path before she reached the elevator doors. Elena stopped, unhurried, and looked at him with the calm, appraising expression she used in every interview, the one that gave away nothing. "Officer Thornton," she said, "we have an appointment scheduled for 9 o'clock. This isn't the time or place for that conversation." "You've been talking to my chief," he said, his voice rising, "asking about cases that were already closed. Who exactly do you think you are?" "I'm conducting an authorized review," Elena said. "The details of that review will be discussed at our scheduled interview, in an appropriate setting, with appropriate documentation." Something in her calm, in the sheer unbothered evenness of her voice, seemed to enrage him further. He had expected, perhaps, that a direct confrontation would rattle her, would produce an apology, a retreat, some acknowledgement that she had overstepped. Instead, he got the same flat, professional composure she'd apparently been giving his department for 6 weeks, and it was more than he could tolerate. "You know what?" he said. "I don't think you're authorized to do anything." He reached out, fast before Elena could react, and closed his hand around the laminated badge clipped to her blazer. "You're done playing cop." The badge tore free with a small metallic snap, the clip bending as it came away from the fabric. It clattered onto the concrete floor between them. Elena did not raise her voice. She did not step back. She looked at the badge on the ground, then back at Thornton, and said, with the same measured calm she used in every interview she had ever conducted, "I'm not a cop." Thornton laughed, short and humorless. "Then what exactly do you think you are?" "Someone you should not have touched," Elena said. She bent down, unhurried, and picked up the badge from the concrete, examining the bent clip with the detached curiosity of someone assessing evidence rather than reacting to an assault. "This laminate is federal judicial property, Officer Thornton. You've just committed an assault on a federally appointed officer of the court in the middle of an active civil rights investigation into your own conduct." For the first time, something flickered across Thornton's face, not quite understanding, but the first cold edge of doubt. "Federal what?" "You'll have the details soon enough," Elena said. She turned, walked to the elevator, and pressed the call button, leaving Thornton standing alone in the empty garage, with the sound of his own heartbeat suddenly very loud in his ears. She did not go to her office first. She went instead to a small conference room on the 4th floor that she used for confidential calls, closed the door, and picked up the secure line she had been issued for exactly this kind of contingency. A line that connected, through 2 layers of federal court staff, directly to the chambers she reported to. "This is Special Master Marsh," she said when the line connected. "I need to report an incident. Officer Wade Thornton, the subject of the pattern review I flagged 3 weeks ago, has just physically assaulted me in the courthouse parking garage and forcibly removed my judicial credential. I want this documented immediately, and I want the existing pattern of conduct file escalated to formal referral status before the department has any opportunity to control the narrative." The clerk on the other end, a young man named Foster who had worked with Elena on 2 previous consent decree matters, did not waste time expressing shock. "Understood, Dr. Marsh. I'll have the Chief Justice's office notified within the hour. Are you safe?" "I'm safe," Elena said. "I'm also not going to let this become the story. The story is the 8 months of falsified reports. This just happens to be the incident that makes the referral impossible to ignore." 22 minutes after Thornton had torn the badge from her blazer, the phone in Elena's 4th floor office rang. She answered it herself, the way she answered every call. "Dr. Marsh," said a composed, formal voice on the other end. "This is calling from the chambers of the Supreme Court of the United States, regarding your special master appointment and the incident reported to our office this morning." Word of that phone call did not stay contained to Elena's office for long. Within the hour, a call had gone out from the Chief Justice's staff to the Attorney General's office, and from there to the regional office of the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division, activating an emergency protocol that existed for exactly one scenario: a federally appointed special master, in the middle of an active civil rights consent decree, physically assaulted by a subject of that very investigation. It was the kind of protocol that, once triggered, moved with a speed and coordination that had nothing to do with local politics and everything to do with the fact that federal courts do not tolerate interference with their own appointed officers. By 9 o'clock, the exact hour Thornton had been scheduled to sit for his interview, 3 unmarked federal vehicles were parked outside the county courthouse annex, and 2 DOJ Civil Rights Division attorneys were seated in the same conference room Elena used for confidential calls, reviewing, in real time, the 8 months of pattern evidence she had already assembled, now supplemented by a security camera recording from the parking garage that had captured the entire encounter from a wide, grainy angle. Thornton's approach, the badge tearing free, Elena's calm, unmoved response. Thornton, meanwhile, had gone about his morning shift with the particular nervous energy of a man trying to convince himself nothing had happened. He filed no report about the parking garage encounter. He mentioned it to no one. He told himself, the way men like Thornton often do, that the woman would complain to someone, eventually, and it would take weeks to go anywhere, and by then he would have found a way to control the story. He had badly misjudged how fast a federal court moves when one of its own is touched. At 11:15 that morning, as Thornton sat in the precinct break room finishing a cup of coffee he had no idea would be his last as a police officer, 2 DOJ Civil Rights Division agents walked in, flanked by his own chief, whose expression made it immediately clear that no amount of departmental loyalty was going to survive what was coming. "Officer Thornton," one of the agents said, laying a thin folder on the table in front of him, "we're here regarding an assault on a federally appointed special master this morning at approximately 6:40 a.m. in connection with an active civil rights consent decree review. We also have body camera footage and written reports connected to 3 prior incidents under review by that same special master. You're going to want to have a lawyer present for what comes next." Thornton's coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. "The woman from the 4th floor," he said slowly, the pieces beginning, too late, to assemble themselves in his mind. "She's a special master, appointed directly by the Supreme Court," the agent said, "which means that what you did this morning wasn't just assault. It was interference with a federal judicial officer in the performance of her duties. That's a federal charge, Officer Thornton, and it comes with considerably more weight than anything your department has ever cleared you of before." His chief, standing behind the agents, said nothing. There was nothing left to say. The department, that had quietly protected Thornton through 2 prior internal reviews, had no protection to offer against a federal referral triggered by the Chief Justice's own office. By early afternoon, the story had moved through the courthouse, the way stories always do, in small, tightly wound institutions. Not through any official announcement, but through the accumulated weight of federal vehicles in the parking lot, agents moving through hallways with quiet purpose, and the sudden, conspicuous absence of Officer Thornton from his usual afternoon patrol. Elena did not participate in any of the hallway speculation. She returned to her 4th-floor office, replaced the bent clip on her judicial credential with a spare she kept in her desk drawer for exactly this kind of contingency, and continued the work she had been doing before the parking garage encounter interrupted it, reviewing the next set of incident reports, cross-referencing them against body camera footage, building the same kind of meticulous, unglamorous record that had made Thornton's referral possible in the first place. Word reached her by mid-afternoon that Thornton had been placed on immediate unpaid suspension, pending a federal investigation, and that the DOJ's Civil Rights Division had formally expanded its review beyond his 3 flagged incidents to a broader pattern audit of his entire 19-year career. 2 other officers who had co-signed several of his more questionable reports over the years were also now under review. What had started as 3 suspicious incident reports had become, within the span of a single morning, a federal investigation with implications for an entire precinct. Elena took no satisfaction in that expansion, or rather, the satisfaction she took was not the loud, public kind. It was the quiet satisfaction of watching a system, however slowly and imperfectly, do exactly what it was designed to do when someone finally gave it the evidence to act on. She had spent her entire career believing that meticulous, patient documentation mattered more than outrage, that the quiet, unglamorous work of oversight, auditing, cross-referencing, filing confidential findings, was where real accountability actually happened. Far from cameras, far from headlines. The parking garage encounter had not changed that belief. If anything, it had confirmed it. Thornton had assumed that a quiet woman with a clipboard was an easy target precisely because she made no noise, and that assumption was what had finally ended his career. 3 weeks later, Thornton would be formally indicted on charges including obstruction, falsification of official records, and interference with a federal officer, with prosecutors specifically citing his assault on Elena as the incident that had triggered the broader investigation into his conduct. He would ultimately resign rather than face a departmental hearing that no longer had any political cover left to offer him. The consent decree Elena had been overseeing would be expanded, at the Supreme Court's direction, to include additional independent audits of the department's entire use-of-force reporting process, a direct, structural consequence that would outlast any single officer's career. Elena Marsh went back to being, as far as the parking attendant and the coffee cart woman and the clerks on the lower floors were concerned, simply the woman from the 4th floor, quiet, punctual, unremarkable in exactly the way she had always preferred. She replaced her judicial credentials clip a second time, this one sturdier than the last, and continued arriving at 6:45 every weekday morning, parking in the same corner of level 2, walking the same route past the vending machines to the service elevator. She never told the story to anyone who hadn't already heard some version of it through the courthouse's own quiet channels. She didn't need to. The federal vehicles that had once filled the parking lot, the agents who had moved through the hallways with quiet purpose, the sudden and permanent absence of Officer Wade Thornton from his usual patrol, all of it had already said everything that needed saying, in the same unglamorous, meticulous language she had spent her entire career speaking fluently, the language of documentation, of consequence, of a system that, when someone finally gave it the evidence, moved exactly as it was designed to move. He had ripped a badge off her blazer and told her she was done playing cop, not understanding that she had never been playing at anything. She had simply been doing the quiet, careful work that made a moment like that one, a corrupt officer's arrogance meeting a federal court's full weight, not just possible, but inevitable. If this story of quiet authority, real accountability, and the kind of justice that doesn't need to raise its voice made your blood boil and then made you smile, make sure to hit that like button, share it with someone who believes power should never go unchecked, and subscribe to the channel for more stories where the underestimated turn out to be the most dangerous people in the room. What would you have done if you were in Dr. Marsh's shoes? Let us know in the comments below. We'll see you in the next one.